is a struggle that, maybe if in all sort of objective, if one had to sort of measure objective reality, we may not win. These are powerful forces we're up against. But not to resist is to succumb to despair. And we can't succumb to despair because that's what they want us to. And so don't let them define whether this is a success or a failure. The fact that you got here, the fact that you sleep here at night, the fact that 80 people were hauled off to jail last night, the fact that New York City has gone absolutely insane over your presence in terms of security measures, creating a kind of green zone around Wall Street, for me, means you won.
Okay, another question. My father still does not believe this is a big thing because it is not being covered on local TV stations or in small amounts. How do you explain to someone that is 60 that there is a news blackout?
Because most Americans are passive consumers of information, and very few are proactive. And the internet's only useful if you're proactive. I would say that we are the most illusioned society on the planet. That the vast majority of Americans live in fantasy about themselves, about who they are, about where we're going. I mean, the cold reality is that we run offshore penal colonies where we openly torture other human beings. Even Barack Obama hasn't seen fit to restore habeas corpus. The FISA Reform Act, and I'm one of the plaintiffs suing the government, is an act which has retroactively made legal what under our Constitution is illegal: the warrantless wiretapping, eavesdropping, and monitoring of tens of millions of Americans. The fact that the executive authority in this country can order an American citizen, and I'm speaking of the Yemeni cleric, to be assassinated. The fact that we prosecute preemptive wars, which under post-Nuremberg laws are defined as criminal wars of aggression. We have no right as a nation to debate the terms of the occupation. And yet we believe, courtesy of a vast system of propaganda, that we embody and promote virtues that the rest of the world should emulate, is an example of how divorced most Americans are from the reality of who we have become and the perception of who we have become. And it's a non-reality based belief system. It's one that at its core is not really about fact or truth. It's about self-exaltation, which makes you feel good, but it's a lie. And it's very, very hard to have rational discussions with people who drink deep from that very dark elixir of American nationalism. I wrote a book on the Christian right, and you can't really have a rational discussion with someone who believes that the world was created 6,000 years ago and dinosaurs had saddles in the Garden of Eden. I think the only thing you can do is reintegrate these people back into the economy because you have to give them hope. The reason that they have retreated into these non-reality based belief systems is because they've lost it. They've fallen into despair. They need miracles. They need fantasy in order to cope with the reality around them. And I think the solution is finally economic. Either we re-enfranchise the working class in this country, and there's been a Weimarization of the American working class, back into the economy, or we're finished. So economic equality, rather than long debates with people who have embraced fantasy, is what we should be working for and spending our time doing.
There's a lot. Kind of talk about some of this. One person asked, "What is your opinion on how to take away the fear from those who fear joining the occupation?"
Well, I was a war correspondent for 20 years, so fear is something I know intimately. And it's really about a kind of, I think there's two ways. One is self-discipline. You've just got to learn to live with fear. And covering conflicts, your perimeter of fear narrows, but when it's crossed, I mean, when you think you're going to get killed or you're in the middle of a firefight and the guy next to you, which has happened to me, gets shot, then you react in ways that, frankly, when I look back on it, are embarrassing. I mean, even to the point of praying, God, if you get me out of here, I won't do this again, kind of stuff. I speak as someone who had to read systematic theology at Harvard, but that's what you're reduced to. And fear is a potent force. I mean, culturally, the systems of power have worked overtime since 9/11. I mean, to make us afraid, both through the media, through orange alerts, Homeland Security, and I think the way to overcome fear is to break the kind of atomization or isolation that is inherent within American society. That when you're, for instance, sitting in a park like this with a group, or when I go down to Washington with Veterans for Peace, there is a kind of communal, even religious quality to those kinds of protests that are deeply empowering. It's that ability to endure situations that are frightening and know that there's somebody standing next to you. And that's why, again, acts of civil disobedience are so important because it is the solidarity of the group and the empathy towards you as a dissident within the group that gives you power, even if you don't get arrested. I find that these kinds of protests are deeply empowering because they make us recognize that we're not alone, and that they allow us to glimpse the kind of power that I think if we build a sustained movement, we can have a power that clearly threatens a corrupt elite.
If the revolution does achieve considerable success, what's next in your opinion?
I don't like the term revolution. I like the term rebellion. I come out of the sort of Julian Benda vision of the world, his book Treason of Intellectuals, where people have to make a choice to their fealty or loyalty to two sets of principles, either privilege and power or justice and truth. And the more you make compromises to those whose loyalty is to privilege and power, the more you diminish the capacity to fight for justice and truth. All of the true correctives in human history have come through movements that have never achieved formal political power. And that's been true in American history, whether it's the anti-slavery movement, the suffragists, labor movement, the civil rights movement. I think it's not our job to take power. It's our job to remain fast around these moral principles. Karl Popper in The Open Society and Its Enemies writes that the question is not how do we get good people.
Do not ignore those
That's
who
the
are
wrong
seizing your
question.
future.
And most people attracted to power are at best mediocre, which is Obama, or venal, which is Bush. The question is how do we make the powerful afraid of us? And the decimation of radical movements in this country and populist movements, one thinks back to the old CIO, the Wobblies, Big Bill Haywood, Mother Jones, has disempowered the poor and the working class. And it is only rebuilding movements that have a kind of constant antagonism to power that we have any hope of reform. So I don't ever want to get close to power. I mean, one of the reasons why as a reporter I never even wanted to have physical or personal relationships with people in power. I think we have to look at ourselves as a force that has the capacity to carry out change and to make a difference. But we have to look at ourselves as a force that will never, if that is going to happen, will never achieve formal power. None of us are going to be in the Senate, and nor should we be, because the politicians, the art of politics is about compromise, it is about manipulation, it is inevitably about deception, even the good politicians. And I think that the only hope for American health and survival is if we have militant movements that hold fast around the principles and pressure the power elite to respond.
Next one is respond to the BBC and tell the UK that we are unorganized? You can answer that.
I would just turn off the BBC. I mean, don't listen to this crap. I mean, all of these messages are meant to demoralize the movement. I mean, and remember that BBC is actually one of the better media outlets, but all of these media, especially these electronic outlets, are commercially owned. I mean, who owns them? Viacom, General Electric, Disney, Rupert Murdoch, News Corp. These are not your friends. And I don't own a TV. And if you've got one in your house, take it out, leave it for the trash collection. You're much better off, listening to the authentic voices around you and reading books. One of the dangers is that we've severed ourselves from print-based culture, and we have been manipulated by images. We've been made to confuse, or we confuse how we've been made to feel with knowledge. And I really try and shut the cant of the electronic media out and remain rooted in print so that I can think. Because, of course, the object, which is why, all these handheld devices and Facebook, I mean, the object is to stop you from thinking. One needs solitude and quiet to think. And the cacophony of modern culture is designed to make it impossible for you to think.
How can occupiers speak in ways that make sense to ordinary Americans?
Nonviolence and issues not of ideology but economic justice. Even if you're a member of the Tea Party at Walmart, anybody coming in and talking about health insurance and a living wage and good public education for your children is going to be heard.